I'd like to talk about how people can work remotely but do it safely. Now, this latest virus of a different kind, not a computer virus, but an actual human virus, has caused a lot of people to now work from home. And I want to address the users, the people who will be getting the work done remotely, on how they can stay safe. It's never been a better time technologically to work remotely, but it's also never been a better time for hackers as well, because they now have a much speedier way of accessing hacked computers and spreading viruses and other malware. So what we need to do is to figure out how to stay safe while working remotely. Your company, your school, your organization for which you work has probably set up a VPN for you to remote in and have your data encrypted from where it goes from your computer into your office. And it's generally thought that this is a safe practice, and it usually is. However, there are times where VPN is not safe enough or not safe at all. Let's talk about the 4 different major problems that you could have while working remotely that could cause you to have an issue with security. The first one I want to talk about is Wi-Fi at home. Now, of all the 4 different issues that have come up, this is one of the lowest security risks that you could run into. And Wi-Fi at home uses encryption by default with most internet service providers, but not all of them. So you should go into your wireless access point, which I'll show you how to do, and you should be able to check to make sure that you have the highest level of encryption. Once that encryption is set, then you know that your risk level is fairly low as far as people hacking your Wi-Fi. It's not impossible, it's just a much lower risk. And part of that is because you're a much lesser target than, say, a business where you have a whole bunch of people all gathered together and you're likely to find multiple people with vulnerabilities.
I'll just show you a couple of different wireless access point settings here. We're in an Xfinity or Comcast wireless device, and once you click on the default gateway, if you're not sure what that is, all you have to do is go in to a run command. So you can right-click on your start button on your Windows computer and type CMD. Hit enter, and after that, you'll want to type ipconfig and hit enter. And this is what you're looking for right here is the gateway, 192.168.0.1. Don't worry about this one up here. This is an IPv6 one, which we don't worry about. Just look at the default gateway, which we see here. And most of the time, yours is going to be 10.0.0.1 by default or 10.1.10.1, depending on how old it is. So what you'll do is go into your web browser, and you'll just put in 192.168.0.1 and hit enter, and you'll log in. And the typical login and password for Comcast is admin, but you might find that it's been updated to something new, so you can check with Comcast for the login information. Once you get in, you click on Wi-Fi, and when you're in Wi-Fi, you'll want to make sure that your security mode is set to WPA2 PSK for pre-shared secret. Then you'll go in and type the password that you'd like, the longer the better, and that's going to be the password that you use when you connect your device, such as your telephone, your mobile phone, or your tablet. And after you do that, you should be pretty safe. Another way to do this is if you have a third-party device, and it works pretty much the same way. This is an Ingenious. I just click on Network Wireless, so you always look for the wireless settings regardless of the brand. And then we'll click on Edit where it says SSID, and you'll want to make sure that it's set once again to WPA2. And you want to make sure that it's set to WPA2-PSK for pre-shared key. And once you've confirmed that that is the way you want it, then you'll click Save, and it'll restart for you, whether you're using the Comcast one or you're using a third party. And then you'll have the best type of wireless security.
Now let's talk about Wi-Fi at hotels, restaurants, and other places, coffee shops, that kind of thing. The risk for using Wi-Fi at these locations, even in airplane, is quite high. And the reason for that is because it's possible to hack into the data before it's ever encrypted and sent off to your work. Now, this is also possible at home. It's just less likely to happen. But when you have Wi-Fi in public locations, they don't always use the highest level of security because not all the devices would be able to connect that way. Older devices need the lower level of security, or security protections than higher level devices. So you might find that you have to use a lower end type of security just to connect more people. And the hack here can be a DNS spoof or an injection that basically makes the hacker themselves the gateway out to the internet. So what they can do is they can pretend to be the gateway, and they can spoof a lot of different people to use their computer as the gateway out to the internet. So the data flows through their computer and then out through the router that's being used at the hotel or the coffee shop. And then it goes out to the internet, and then they can intercept all that traffic even before it's encrypted. It's not so much that it's your computer that it's infecting, it's just spoofing all the different devices that are on the network, such as the network switch, the router, the wireless access point. They all get spoofed into thinking that the hacker computer is the one that's being used to go out to the internet. And it can be happening within several hundred feet of where you're sitting, because those public wireless access points are much more powerful than the one you're going to have at home. Because the risk is so high, there's not a lot of good mitigation techniques. Some decent techniques would be to use either a remote desktop server or a Citrix server. And what that would do is it would allow you to, instead of using your own local computer to be entering passwords and opening email and websites, it would allow you to open up a remote server's location to look at email, look at websites, and things like that. So you end up not having things done locally, and therefore, if any kind of traffic is intercepted, they're not going to know what's actually happening because it's not happening on your computer. So that can mitigate some of the risks, but it won't completely absolve you of any types of security risks while you're in a public location. So you should consider very hard whether or not you want to work in a public location or a hotel room because of that fact. Now, what you can do in a hotel room is something that you can't necessarily do in a coffee shop, and that is you can connect a LAN cable a lot of times. A lot of times they'll have a port that you can plug into instead of using wireless. That is a much safer way to go, because then the airwaves themselves are not going to be a place where you would be at risk. Your next risk is going to be using your email. And once again, the risk on this one is high. And the risk is from phishing emails, also sometimes called spear phishing emails. Phishing emails are generally when a hacker sends off emails blasted out to everyone and hoping someone's going to click on a link that will then infect their computer, and then it will infect any data that gets transmitted anywhere off that you're trying to go. So it could turn your computer into a spam bot that sends off spam to millions of different locations, and it causes your computer to run very slowly. It's one of the tip-offs to this whole thing. It could also cause you to accidentally send malware to your company. Now, I've actually seen this happen before with a multi-billion-dollar company that called me after the fact, where a user had picked up a virus while using VPN, transmitted that into the server. It then dispersed it out to all of the users in the whole company, brought this multi-billion-dollar company down for 2.5 days. So this is definitely a risk that you could run into with phishing emails. Spear phishing is a little bit more targeted. So for instance, if you're in the financial sector, it's going to send financial type of emails. It's going to be a little bit more targeted for the vertical market that you may be in. Some things to keep in mind here is if you get an email from an outside location, it should be suspect right away, even if you feel you know the person, because a lot of times people's emails will get hacked of people you know, and it will send off phishing or spear phishing emails off to everybody in the contacts list. So clicking on a link or an attachment is not a good idea with phishing emails. And it's also a risk for clicking on links and attachments for internal email. And that's because you could have a hacker send an email that's spoofed an internal user. So it looks like it came internally, but it may not have, or they got their password hacked, and then they are actually sending an internal email to you, but the links and the attachments are not safe. So in both cases, what I recommend is that before you click on a link, before you open an attachment, is you call the person who sent it to you and say, hey, did you send me this? Is it going to be safe? And then you can go ahead and open it at that point if you deem it to be safe. Otherwise, there's no way to know if any email that shows up in your mailbox is going to be safe. Another good idea is if anyone wants you to make a purchase or send money over a wire, to once again make sure that you do this verbally before taking care of it electronically. We also don't want to open up personal emails on a business computer. And that's because if we open up personal emails, those are more likely to be infected because they're not going to have the same protections that corporations tend to have, or even institutions such as schools and colleges and things like that. They're going to have better protections than some of these public email services. So it's a good idea to just not open up any personal email on your business computer. If you want to open it on your phone or your own personal computer, something that's not tied back to the business, then that's fine. That's a little safer for the company. Remember, you want to protect the company because you could be out of a job if you make that kind of mistake where you end up infecting the organization. Whereas if you just infect your own computer, then of course you run risk to yourself, but you're only running that risk to yourself. And the last thing I want to talk about is web surfing. Web surfing is considered a medium risk in my opinion, and that's because although it used to be a high risk, it's actually come down thanks to Google and some other organizations. So for instance, what Google did for us was they said, hey, we're not going to show up your search results, your websites in our search results, if you don't have a public certificate, or we're going to mark it as not safe. And what that does for us is it keeps only companies that have been verified by a public certification authority from having a website that people could click on links and attachments and things like that. So that's one thing that has been done to make the internet safer. The other thing is web browsers such as Google Chrome, Microsoft's Edge or their Chromium-based browser, Firefox, Opera, all these different web browsers now have a list of sites that are considered unsafe. So if you try to go to one of these sites, then it's going to pop up with a warning saying you should not be going to this site because it is not safe. It could have viruses or it's known to have viruses, so don't do that. What I've found to be a risk here is mostly advertising. So if you can use an ad blocker, great. You just have to get the approval of your organization that you can install an ad blocker. Some web browsers are now including an ad blocker in them, such as Opera. Opera already has a built-in web blocker, and you can get them as extensions on Google Chrome and others. So if you don't have an ad blocker and you see ads and you click on one, here's the risk. A lot of times what hackers will now do is they will put up a legitimate ad that goes to a legitimate location. And they'll wait a couple of weeks until it's fully trusted by everyone, and then they'll inject a virus. And after that, you click on the ad, and then it takes you to an infected site, or it downloads a piece of malware that then infects your computer and possibly your corporation or your organization as well. So that's really the big risk of web surfing, is clicking on ads. And of course, there is a risk with clicking on links and clicking on it, downloading attachments. It's just now with all the protections that we have built into our Windows computers, for instance, as well as our web browsers, it's a lot less of a risk than it used to be. So make sure you stay away from ads for the most part and get an ad blocker if you can. So hopefully that'll give you some good tips from working from home. Of course, a lot of people are worried about going into work. We've got pandemics, we've got viruses going on, we've got things that we want to protect our own bodies from. So now we're going to be working from home, and I'll come up with some new tips for you as well as time goes on that can help you stay safe. Feel free to send me an email or write a comment and let me know your ideas, because maybe you've got some ideas I haven't come up with myself, or if you have any questions that I can help you answer.